She spent 3 years scrubbing blood from marble floors and keeping her head down, but Abraham could sense something whenever she passed through corridors he occupied. And every time his wolf stirred with recognition, she had already vanished into the maze of servant passages. She was merely a maid in the eyes of the court, and he could never be allowed to know otherwise. Now, with the High Council demanding her head, she could not simply bow and accept the chains in silence. That dawn, she did not hide. They dragged her across the throne room floor, and the entire court laughed. Everyone was shocked by her defiance, but no one more than Abraham, because the Alpha King felt it like a blade to the chest. And when fate finally tears away the veil, the Alpha King does not let his Luna slip through his fingers again. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The heat arrived before he did. Christiana felt it crawl up her spine like invisible fingers, that oppressive warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen fires and everything to do with him. She froze mid-scrub, her hands pressed against cold stone, the bloody rag clutched between her fingers. She did not need to see him to know. Her body recognized that presence before her mind could catch up. The sudden tightness in her lungs, the prickle of awareness that made every hair on her arms stand at attention. That suffocating pull she had spent 3 years learning to resist. The Alpha King was in the western wing, too close. She dropped the rag into the bucket with a splash that made old Marta glance up from sorting herbs. Christiana did not wait for questions. She wiped her hands hastily on her stained apron and slipped through the servants' door, the one that led to the narrow stone stairwell most nobles forgot existed. The cold morning air in the stairwell hit her face like salvation. She pressed her back against the rough wall, chest heaving, forcing her lungs to drag in air that did not taste like cedar and leather and something wild she had no name for. 3 years doing exactly this. 3 years fleeing whenever that unmistakable scent announced his proximity. 3 years ensuring their paths never crossed long enough for him to truly see her face. To let those amber eyes she had only glimpsed from behind pillars and through doorways, focus on her for more than a heartbeat. Because Christiana knew, with a certainty that kept her awake at night, what would happen if he ever stopped to truly look at her. If those eyes that noticed what others overlooked actually saw her, everything would shatter. She rested her head against the cold stone, closing her eyes against the sting of exhaustion. Her entire life depended on remaining invisible. It depended on no one asking questions about the kitchen maid who had appeared 3 years ago with no proper references, no family name spoken aloud, no verifiable history. Head cook Marta had accepted her only because Christiana could read, unusual for a maid, and because she worked twice as hard as anyone else and never ever complained. A fragile foundation, but enough to keep a roof over her head when she had nowhere left to run. And where would she run now if she fled Blackridge? Back to the ashes of Elsinore. Back to the ruins where her mother's blood still stained the throne room floor. Back to the men who had burned her kingdom and called it justice. Never. The memory flared hot and vicious, her mother's crown rolling across marble as the castle burned, the screams, the way Lord Severin had smiled as he gave the order. Let no daughter of the Ashen line survive. But one had, barely. Christiana opened her eyes and straightened her spine. She had survived by becoming no one, by scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots and singing softly while she worked, so that no one would suspect the maid in the corner was a queen's daughter who had crawled through fire to live. The sound of boots on stone echoed from below. Her heart stuttered. She moved quickly, silently, deeper into the maze of corridors only servants knew. Away from that scent. Away from the man whose wolf had been searching for something he could not name. Away from the Alpha King who could never be allowed to find her. Because if Abraham of Blackridge ever discovered that the invisible maid he kept almost noticing was Christiana of the Ashen line, the last survivor of a murdered royal family, her second chance at life would end before it truly began. The dawn bells rang. Christiana reached the servants' quarters and pressed herself into the shadows between two wooden crates, breathing hard, waiting for her heart to slow. She would make it through another day unseen. She always did. But even as she thought it, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Not his. These were harder, crueler. The sound of iron-toed boots that belonged to the High Council's guards. The door to the servants' hall slammed open. "Christiana of the lower halls," a voice announced, cold and formal. "You are summoned before the High Court." Her blood turned to ice. The shadows could not hide her anymore. In the kingdom of Blackridge, justice was a blade that cut only one way. The High Council did not investigate servants. They did not question. They did not deliberate. When a maid was accused, the accusation itself was the verdict. Guilt was assumed. Punishment was swift. And mercy was a word that existed only for those born with names that mattered. Maidservants held no names in the court records, no lineage documented, no right to defense. They were simply erased. Christiana understood this as rough hands seized her arms and hauled her from the shadows. She did not fight. Fighting would only give them an excuse to be crueler. Instead, she kept her spine straight, her chin level, even as they dragged her through the narrow servants' corridors toward the grand halls where nobles walked. Other servants pressed themselves against the walls as she passed. Some looked away, shame and relief warring in their eyes, relief that it was not them. Old Marta made the sign of the moon goddess, lips moving in silent prayer. A young kitchen boy named Tam stared with wide, horrified eyes until someone pulled him back into the scullery. No one spoke. No one dared. The corridors widened. Stone floors gave way to polished marble. Torchlight became chandelier glow. And with each step closer to the High Court, Christiana felt the weight of memory pressing against her ribs. 3 years ago, standing at the servants' entrance with forged papers clutched in trembling hands. The parchment had cost her the last piece of jewelry she'd managed to hide. A ring her mother had given her on her 16th birthday. "No family name?" Marta had asked, suspicious. "No family," Christiana had whispered. It was not entirely a lie. Marta's eyes had softened. "Keep your head down, work hard, ask no questions. You'll survive." Survival. That was all she had fought for, all she had allowed herself to want. Until now. The throne room doors loomed ahead, massive oak reinforced with iron. 2 guards shoved them open, and the sound echoed like a death knell. The High Court was already assembled. 5 figures sat in elevated chairs forming a semicircle before the throne itself. Elder Marcus leaned forward, his thin lips curved in something that might have been anticipation or hunger. Elder Lucian sat rigid, his expression carved from ice, his eyes calculating. Lord Severin occupied the rightmost chair, quiet, still, his dark gaze tracking Christiana's approach with an intensity that made her stomach clench. She had seen that look before, in another throne room, in another life. But it was the man on the throne who stole the air from her lungs. Abraham, Alpha King of Blackridge, sat perfectly still. His massive frame was draped in dark furs over leather and steel. His amber eyes, those eyes she had spent 3 years avoiding, were locked on her with an expression she could not read. His jaw was tight. His hands gripped the armrests of his throne as if holding himself in place, and even from across the vast chamber, She felt it. That pull, that terrible, undeniable recognition crawling beneath her skin. The guards forced her to her knees on the cold marble. She kept her head high. If she was going to die, she would die as her mother had taught her, with dignity intact. "The maid from the lower kitchens," Elder Marcus announced, his voice dripping with contempt. "Accused of theft, treason, conspiracy with enemies of the crown." Christiana's breath caught. Treason. "She was found in possession of a seal belonging to the High Council," Elder Lucian continued, his tone clinical. "A seal used to forge letters to northern rebels. Lies, all of it. But her word, a nameless maid's word, meant nothing against theirs." "The evidence is clear," Lord Severin said quietly, his voice smooth as poisoned silk. "The sentence should be swift." Abraham had not spoken, had not moved, but his eyes never left her face. A guard stepped forward with iron shackles, heavy, crude, meant to humiliate as much as restrain. When the cold metal closed around Christiana's wrists, she flinched, not from the weight, but from the sudden, searing heat that flooded her veins. Her eyes snapped up to the throne. Abraham's knuckles were white against the stone armrests. His chest rose and fell too quickly, and in his eyes, those burning amber eyes, she saw something wild thrashing beneath the surface. The chains did not burn because of the iron. They burned because he was watching. And for the first time in 3 years of hiding, the Alpha King truly saw her. Abraham had ruled Blackridge for 20 years without a mate, 20 years of watching his generals, his guards, even his servants find their bonded pairs, while his wolf paced restlessly inside his chest, waiting for something that never came. The elders had suggested arranged marriages, political alliances, bloodline preservation. He had refused them all, because his wolf knew something was missing. Someone was close, just beyond reach. For months, no, longer, he had caught traces of a scent that made his wolf claw at his control. Wildflowers and ash, strength wrapped in softness. It appeared in corridors he walked, in chambers he entered moments too late, in courtyards where servants scattered before he arrived. He had searched, gods he had searched, but whoever carried that scent was a ghost. There one moment, vanished the next. Until now. Abraham's fingers dug into the stone armrests of his throne as he stared at the woman kneeling in chains before his court. The maid, they claimed, was a traitor, the servant whose name he had never heard spoken until this morning. Christiana. His wolf surged forward with a violence that nearly broke his control. Her. The memories crashed through him like a flood. 6 months ago, the healer's wing. He had entered to check on wounded soldiers returned from the border skirmishes. And there, in the corner, quiet as a shadow, a maid with gentle hands wrapped a guard's bleeding arm. She worked with practiced precision, her voice low and soothing, as she calmed the man's fear. "You'll be fine," she had murmured. "The wound is clean." Abraham had frozen in the doorway. That scent, wildflowers and ash. She had glanced up just once, and their eyes had met for a heartbeat before she ducked her head and slipped through a side door. By the time he crossed the room, she was gone. 3 months ago, the dawn council meeting. He had walked the eastern corridor and caught that scent again, stronger this time. He had turned the corner quickly, too quickly, and glimpsed a figure in servant's grey disappearing down the stairwell. "Wait," he had called. But she had already vanished. 1 month ago. The kitchens. He had descended personally to inspect provisions, an excuse if he was honest with himself. He was hunting that scent. And there, carrying a basket of herbs, she had walked directly into his path. She had stopped, bowed, but not too deeply. not with the trembling subservience most servants showed him. Her spine had been straight. Her chin lifted just enough. "Your Majesty," she had murmured, and started to step around him. "Your name," he had demanded. "I am no one important, Alpha King." Her voice had been soft, but steady. "Excuse me." And she had walked away before he could command her to stop. That scent had haunted him for days afterward. Now she knelt before him in chains, and he could not look away. "Look at her," Elder Marcus sneered, his voice cutting through Abraham's thoughts. A maid who thought herself clever enough to plot against the throne. Laughter rippled through the assembled nobles. Cruel, mocking. Abraham's wolf snarled. Christiana lifted her head. Her eyes, deep and defiant and achingly familiar, swept across the council before settling on Elder Marcus. "I plotted nothing," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, steady as a blade. "But even if I had, this court would never hear truth from someone like me." The laughter grew louder. "Someone like you?" Elder Marcus leaned forward, grinning. "And what are you, girl? A nameless maid with delusions." "I am someone you have already condemned," Christiana interrupted quietly. "My guilt was decided before I entered this room. So why pretend this is justice?" Silence cracked through the hall like breaking ice. Abraham's wolf roared inside his chest, not in anger at her words, but in recognition of the courage it took to speak them, the dignity, the unflinching honesty in the face of certain death. He had seen that look before, in warriors who refused to kneel before enemies, in queens who faced execution with their crowns held high, in someone who had been broken but never defeated. Abraham leaned forward slowly. His eyes locked on her face, on the sharp angles of her cheekbones, the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes blazed even as chains weighed down her wrists. And then, finally, he truly looked. Not at a servant, not at an accused traitor, but at her. The scent crashed over him like a tidal wave. Wild flowers and ash, strength and survival, ancient bloodlines wrapped in 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility. His wolf stopped pacing. The words slammed into Abraham's consciousness with brutal, undeniable certainty. Mate. The realization should have brought clarity. Instead, it brought chaos. Abraham's wolf thrashed violently inside his chest, clawing for dominance, demanding he cross the distance between throne and prisoner, and tear apart anyone who dared keep his mate in chains. But years of iron control held him frozen in place, barely. His knuckles cracked against stone, his vision edged with gold. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to claim, to protect. And still, the council continued as if his world had not just shattered and reformed around the woman kneeling before them. "She speaks well for a kitchen rat," Elder Marcus observed, his tone dripping with amusement. He rose from his seat, circling Christiana like a predator, savoring wounded prey. "Tell me, girl, did you practice that little speech while scrubbing pots? Or did treason come naturally to bastards with no name?" A few nobles tittered. Christiana's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. "No family," Marcus continued, louder now, playing to his audience. "No history, no worth. You are exactly what this kingdom discards every day. Disposable." He stopped in front of her, looking down with naked contempt. "And yet, you thought you could touch matters of state. You thought your hands, filthy from servitude, could hold a council seal." "I never touched your seal," Christiana said quietly. "She denies it," Marcus laughed, throwing his hands wide. "As if denial has ever mattered for her kind. We do not waste trials on servants, girl. We do not waste time." "Then why am I here?" Christiana's voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. "If I am already condemned, if my words mean nothing, if I am as disposable as you claim, why drag me before this court at all?" The laughter faltered. Marcus's smile thinned. "Why?" Christiana continued, her voice growing stronger. "Because this was never about guilt. This is about reminding everyone who watches that power decides truth, that courts like this do not exist to protect the innocent. They exist to protect the powerful." She lifted her chained wrists slightly. "You do not fear what I have done. You fear what I represent. Someone who dared exist outside your control." "Enough," Elder Lucian said coldly, though something flickered in his eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or recognition. But Christiana was not finished. "You call me disposable, nameless, worthless." She met Marcus's gaze without blinking. "But if that were true, you would have killed me in the kitchens, quietly, quickly. Instead, you brought me here, made a spectacle, because you need witnesses to believe that crushing people like me is justice." The silence that followed was absolute. Abraham's wolf howled. His mate, stood before a council of vultures delivering the truth they had spent decades burying, and every word from her lips made his chest ache with pride and fury in equal measure. She was magnificent, and they were going to kill her. "Enough of this," Marcus snarled, his composure finally cracking. "The girl has condemned herself with her own insolence." "She has spoken what we all know," Lord Severin said quietly from his seat, and for the first time, Abraham's attention snapped to the man. Severin's dark eyes were fixed on Christiana, with an intensity that made Abraham's hackles rise. "But truth does not grant mercy. The evidence against her is clear. The seal was found in her possession." "Planted," Christiana said flatly. "Prove it," Severin challenged, his voice soft as a serpent's hiss. She could not. They both knew it. Elder Lucian stood, his expression carved from granite. "The High Council has heard enough. The accused has no defense, no alibi, and no standing to challenge this court's authority." He turned toward the throne, toward Abraham, as if seeking confirmation. Abraham's jaw clenched so hard, he tasted blood. "The sentence," Lucian continued, "is death by moonrise." The words dropped like stones into still water. Abraham's vision went gold-edged. His wolf surged forward with enough force that his hands shifted, claws breaking through skin, scraping against stone. No, no. If she died, everything died. The bond that had finally awakened. The mate his wolf had searched for. The woman who had survived 3 years in his castle, carrying secrets and scars and unbreakable dignity. His control began to fracture. "All in agreement?" Lucian asked. "Agreed," Marcus said with savage satisfaction. "Agreed," 2 other elders echoed. Lord Severin hesitated for just a heartbeat before nodding. "Agreed." Elder Lucian lifted the ceremonial gavel, a massive thing of carved stone and iron. Abraham's wolf screamed. The gavel struck stone with a sound like breaking bones. "Execution approved." The silence that followed the gavel strike was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The execution order hung in the air like smoke, choking and final. Christiana kept her head high even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She had known this would be the outcome, had prepared herself for it. Death was simply another enemy she would face with her spine straight and her dignity intact. But then, a sound. Stone scraping against stone. Low, grinding, deliberate. Every head in the throne room turned. Abraham rose from his throne. The movement was slow, controlled. Each inch deliberate as if he were restraining something massive and violent beneath his skin. His hands released the armrests, claws retracting with visible effort. His amber eyes, burning gold now, fully wolf, never left Christiana's face. The chair scraped backward with a sound like thunder. Elder Marcus's smile faltered. "Your Majesty." I did not authorize this trial. Abraham's voice was quiet. Lethal. The kind of quiet that made men reach for weapons. The council froze. The seal, Elder Lucian began carefully, was found in her possession. The evidence. I did not approve chains on my Luna. The word detonated through the throne room. Luna. Gasps erupted from every corner. Nobles stepped back. Guards stiffened. Elder Marcus's face drained of color. Your Luna, Marcus stammered. This is a maid, a servant. You cannot possibly— I can. Abraham descended the throne steps, each one measured, purposeful. I will. Christiana's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes locked on his as he crossed the distance between them, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not look away. Could not look away. He had felt it too. The bond, the pull, the impossible, undeniable truth that had haunted them both. Abraham stopped before her and dropped to one knee, bringing himself to her level. The entire court inhaled sharply. The Alpha King knelt for no one. His hand reached out, gentle, reverent, and lifted her chin. Christiana of the Ashen Line, he said softly, his voice carrying through the silent hall. Last daughter of Queen Elara. Rightful heir to the fallen kingdom of Elsinore. The throne room erupted. Shouts, denials, chaos. Christiana trembled. You should not. I should have seen you sooner, Abraham cut in, his thumb brushing across her jaw with heartbreaking tenderness. I should have recognized you the first time you ran from me. But I see you now. She's lying, Marcus sputtered, recovering. This is a desperate ploy. Abraham's head turned with predatory slowness. The gold in his eyes flared. Are you calling your Alpha King a liar, Marcus? Marcus went silent. Abraham rose to his full height and grasped the chains binding Christiana's wrists. For a moment, he simply held them, his jaw clenched, fury radiating from every line of his massive frame. Then he pulled. The iron shattered. Pieces of chain clattered across marble like broken bones. Christiana gasped as the weight fell away, her wrists red but free. Abraham kept one of her hands in his, turning to face the council with her at his side. Christiana of Elsinore was 7 years old when her kingdom burned, he said, his voice ringing with authority. When Lord Severin's coup murdered her mother and slaughtered her people. Every eye turned to Lord Severin. The man sat perfectly still, but Christiana saw it, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers gripped the armrest just a fraction too hard. He recognized her now, and he knew exactly what his presence on this council meant. The Ashen Line was declared extinct, Abraham continued. The survivors hunted, the bloodline erased. He squeezed Christiana's hand. But one lived, one survived, and she has been here, in my castle, for 3 years, while traitors sat on my council. This is madness, Severin said quietly, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Abraham's smile was cold and sharp. Then prove me wrong. He turned to the guards stationed at the chamber doors. Bring me the blood records, Abraham commanded. All of them. Royal lineages from every kingdom in the Northern Territories, and summon the blood mages. The guards hesitated, looking to the council. Now, Abraham growled, and his wolf's dominance crashed through the room like a physical force. The guards scattered to obey. Christiana stood frozen beside him, her hand still clasped in his, her heart racing. The man who had been her silent hunter for 3 years had just declared her his mate before the entire court. And Lord Severin, the man who had murdered her mother, sat 10 feet away, trapped. The blood mages arrived within the hour. 2 ancient women in grey robes, their hands marked with the sacred symbols of lineage verification. They carried with them scrolls older than Abraham's reign, records that documented every royal bloodline in the Northern Territories, preserved through magic and memory. The throne room had not emptied. If anything, more people had crowded in. Word had spread through the castle like wildfire. The Alpha King had claimed a mate. A maid was supposedly a lost princess, and Lord Severin, respected council member, sat accused of treason by implication. Christiana stood beside Abraham's throne, her freed wrists still bearing the angry marks of iron. She felt exposed, raw. Every eye in the room weighed on her like stones. The lead blood mage approached, her milky eyes somehow seeing everything. "Your Majesty, my lady." She bowed to them both. "We will need a blood sample." Christiana extended her hand without hesitation. She had nothing left to hide. The mage pricked her finger with a silver needle, letting 3 drops of blood fall onto an ancient piece of parchment covered in faded script. The blood soaked into the page, spreading like ink through water. Then the parchment began to glow. Soft at first, then brighter. Golden light traced through words written centuries ago, connecting lines, illuminating names. The mage's weathered fingers followed the luminous trail as it climbed the page, higher and higher through generations, until it reached the top. House Elsinore, the Ashen Line, Queen Alara, Princess Christiana. The glow intensified, then faded, leaving the name blazing in gold script. The mage turned to face the court. "The blood does not lie. This woman carries the direct lineage of Queen Alara of Elsinore. She is Christiana, daughter of the Ashen Line, presumed dead these 10 years. The throne room exploded with noise. Christiana's knees buckled. The memories crashed over her like a wave she had held back for a decade. Her mother's face, the screams, the smell of smoke and blood. "Run, Christiana. Run and do not look back." But she had looked back, had seen her mother surrounded by Severin's soldiers, had watched the blade fall, had heard her mother's last words carried on dying breath. "The Ashen Line endures." She had been 7 years old, dressed in a nightgown, barefoot, running through corridors turned to flame. A loyal guard, she never learned his name, had grabbed her, thrown a cloak over her, and dragged her through a hidden passageway as the castle collapsed behind them. "They'll hunt you," he had gasped, bleeding from a dozen wounds. "Never tell anyone who you are. Never." He had died before dawn. She had been alone ever since. Christiana felt the world tilting, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. Then strong arms caught her, steadying her against a broad chest. "Abraham." "Breathe," he murmured against her hair, his voice for her alone. "I have you." "She killed her," Christiana whispered, her voice breaking. "He killed my mother and burned my home, and I was 7, and I know." Abraham's arms tightened around her. "I know." For a moment, the throne room and its chaos faded. There was only his warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. The bond between them hummed like a living thing, offering comfort she had not felt in 10 years. "You survived," Abraham said quietly. "That took more strength than any crown." When Christiana finally pulled back and turned to face the court, she found it divided. Half the nobles stared at her with shock and dawning respect. The other half looked to the council with uncertainty. Elder Marcus had gone pale. Elder Lucian's calculating expression had shifted to something resembling concern. And Lord Severin sat perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on Christiana, with the cold focus of a predator, realizing the prey had teeth. "Lord Severin," Abraham said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You led the coalition that responded to Elsinore's fall. You personally investigated the royal family's deaths." "I did," Severin replied smoothly. We found no survivors. Because you made certain there were none, Christiana said, her voice steady now. She stepped forward, away from Abraham's protective presence, facing her mother's murderer across the marble floor. You orchestrated the coup. You killed Queen Ilara, and you spent 10 years ensuring no one questioned Elsinore's fall. Prove it, Severin challenged. The seal, Elder Lucian said suddenly, his eyes widening. The forged seal found in her possession. It was yours, Severin. You planted it. Severin's jaw tightened. You needed her dead, Abraham continued, pieces falling into place. When you realized who she was, or feared she might be, you framed her for treason. Quick execution, no questions asked. This is absurd, Severin said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Is it? Abraham descended from his throne. Every inch the predator. Then you won't mind if we examine your private correspondence, your financial records, your connections to the Northern Rebellion you've spent years claiming to fight. Severin stood abruptly. The guards at the doors shifted, hands moving to weapons. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Severin smiled, cold and sharp and utterly without humor. Clever girl, he said softly, looking at Christiana. You always were. And he ran. Severin did not run far. He ran to war. Within hours, bells rang throughout Blackridge Castle. Rebel forces, mercenaries. Severin had kept hidden in the northern forests, descended on the kingdom like a plague. They wore no colors, carried no banners, but their purpose was singular and brutal. Kill the Ashen Line's last heir. Finish what Severin had started 10 years ago. Abraham had moved Christiana to his private chambers, the most defensible location in the castle. Elite guards lined every corridor. Archers positioned on ramparts. The castle transformed into a fortress within moments. But Severin had lived within these walls for years. He knew every secret passage, every weakness, every route the guards would not think to defend. Christiana stood at the window of Abraham's chambers, watching smoke rise from the southern gates, where Severin's forces had breached the outer walls. Her hands trembled against the stone sill. This is because of me, she whispered. All these people dying. This is because of him, Abraham corrected, moving to stand behind her. His presence was solid, grounding. Severin made his choices long before you set foot in this castle. You are not responsible for his evil. But I brought it to your doorstep. You brought yourself to my doorstep. Abraham's hand covered hers on the sill, and I would burn this castle to ash before I let him take you from me. The bond between them pulsed, warm, fierce, undeniable. Before Christiana could respond, the door to the chamber burst open. Not guards, assassins. 3 of them, dressed in black, blades already drawn. They must have come through the hidden passageways, the ones only council members knew. Christiana stumbled backward as the first assassin lunged. Abraham moved like lightning. He caught the man's blade with his bare hand, claws erupting through skin, shattering steel. His other hand closed around the assassin's throat, and he threw the body across the room with enough force to crack stone. The second assassin went for Christiana. She dove sideways, reaching for anything. A chair, a candelabra, anything to defend herself. Her fingers closed around an iron poker from the fireplace, just as the assassin's blade descended. She blocked. The impact jolted through her arms, nearly knocking her down, but she held. The assassin snarled and raised his blade again. Abraham's claws tore through his back. The man fell, but the third assassin had circled wide, quiet as death, and his blade was already arcing toward Christiana's exposed throat. Time seemed to slow. Christiana saw the blade, saw death coming, saw her mother's face and thought, I'm sorry. I tried. Then Abraham was there, between her and the blade. Steel bit into flesh with a sickening sound. "No!" Christiana screamed. Abraham caught the assassin's wrist, stopping the blade inches deep in his shoulder. His eyes blazed pure gold, and his growl shook the chamber walls. He crushed the man's wrist with a single squeeze, then tore out his throat. The body dropped. Abraham swayed. "Abraham!" Christiana caught him as he stumbled, blood pouring from the wound in his shoulder. It was deep, too deep. She could see bone. "I'm fine," he gritted out, but he wasn't. The blade had been poisoned. She could see the blackness spreading through his veins from the wound. "You're not fine, you stubborn." Her voice broke. "Why did you do that?" Abraham's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Because you are my mate, my Luna, and I will stand between you and death until my last breath." The bond between them exploded, not the gentle pull she had felt before. This was a wildfire, a force of nature. It crashed through her chest, down her spine, into every cell of her body. And something that had been sleeping inside her for 10 years, something buried beneath trauma and survival and carefully constructed invisibility, woke. Christiana gasped as heat flooded her veins. Not painful, not burning, but alive, wild, ancient, her wolf. "Christiana," Abraham breathed, his eyes widening despite his pain. "Your eyes." She felt it rising, clawing, demanding release after a decade of forced dormancy. Her mother had been a powerful alpha. Her bloodline carried the strength of generations. But Christiana had never shifted. The trauma of that night, watching her mother die, fleeing through fire, had locked her wolf away so deeply she had thought it gone forever. Now, with her mate bleeding in her arms and enemies at the gates, her wolf would not be denied. The change ripped through her. Bones cracked, reshaped. Fur erupted across skin, her senses sharpened to impossible clarity. She could smell Severin's forces throughout the castle, could hear Abraham's heartbeat growing fainter, could taste the poison in his blood. The last thing Christiana thought before the shift completed was, "I will not lose him." Then there was only the wolf, massive, silver as moonlight, eyes blazing with the power of the Ashen Line. She threw back her head and howled. The sound shattered windows, echoed through stone, carried across the kingdom like a proclamation. The lost princess had returned, and she would burn anyone who threatened her mate. The castle guard spoke of it for years afterward. How a silver wolf the size of a warhorse burst from the Alpha King's chambers with a howl that made grown warriors drop to their knees. How she moved through Severin's forces like a blade through parchment, fast, merciless, devastatingly precise. Christiana's wolf was everything 10 years of survival had forged, unbreakable, lethal, and finally free. She tore through the corridors with Abraham's scent guiding her. He was wounded, poisoned, but alive. The mate bond pulsed between them like a lifeline, and it told her two things clearly. He would survive, and he needed her to end this. Severin's mercenaries fled before her. Those too slow to run fell. She was not cruel, but she was absolute. Each kill was clean, necessary. The protection of her mate and her kingdom demanded nothing less. By the time she reached the throne room, word had already spread. The lost princess lives. The Ashen Wolf has awakened. Severin stood in the center of the throne room, surrounded by the last of his loyal fighters. He had tried to claim the throne in the chaos, Abraham's throne, as if sitting in it would grant him legitimacy. When Christiana's wolf prowled through the massive doors, every head turned. Severin's face went pale. She shifted. The transformation back to human form was smoother this time, her wolf settling just beneath her skin, ready to emerge again if needed. She stood naked and unashamed in the center of the throne room, wrapped only in moonlight and fury. Someone threw a cloak over her shoulders, one of the guards bowing his head in respect. "Christiana," Severin said, attempting his smooth diplomat's voice even now. "Be reasonable." "You will address me properly," she interrupted, her voice ringing through the hall with an authority she had never allowed herself to claim. "Or you will not speak at all." Severin's jaw clenched. "I am Christiana of House Elsinore, daughter of Queen Alara, heir to the Ashen Line." She walked toward him slowly, every step deliberate. "The girl you tried to murder, the princess you declared dead, the bloodline you attempted to erase. The remaining mercenaries dropped their weapons. I was 7 years old when you killed my mother," Christiana continued, stopping just outside his reach. "I spent 10 years surviving, hiding, scrubbing floors in the castle of the one man whose protection you could not breach." Her lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "You failed, Severin. Then. And now. The council is dissolved," a voice said from the doorway. "Abraham." He walked into the throne room, flanked by guards, one hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder, but his spine straight and his presence commanding. The poison had been purged by the pack healers, the wound treated. He was pale but standing, and his eyes held only pride as he looked at Christiana. "Lord Severin is charged with high treason, murder of Queen Alara, attempted murder of Princess Christiana, and conspiracy against the crown," Abraham announced. "He will be held for trial and execution." Guards moved forward, seizing Severin. "This isn't over," Severin snarled as they dragged him toward the dungeons. "The northern kingdoms will never accept her. She's been a maid. The northern kingdoms will accept their rightful queen," Elder Lucian said quietly, stepping forward from where the remaining council members had gathered. He bowed, a full, formal bow, to Christiana. "Or they will answer to Blackridge." One by one, the others followed. Elder Marcus, pale and shaken, bent his knee. The guards, the nobles, the servants who had watched her scrub floors for 3 years. All of them bowed. Christiana stood frozen, overwhelmed by the moment, by the weight of crowns and kingdoms and destinies she had never asked for. Then Abraham crossed to her side, and he knelt. The throne room gasped. "Abraham," she whispered, "you don't have to—" "I'm not kneeling as your subject," he said quietly, looking up at her with those amber eyes that saw everything she was and everything she had survived. "I'm kneeling as your mate." Her breath caught. "Christiana of the Ashen Line," Abraham continued, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You have your kingdom back, your crown, your name. You need nothing from me." He reached up, taking her hand in his. "But I am asking anyway." The bond between them hummed with warmth and hope and fierce devotion. "Will you stand beside me?" Christiana looked down at the Alpha King kneeling before her, his hand warm in hers, his amber eyes reflecting nothing but absolute certainty. Around them, the throne room held its breath. For 10 years, she had survived by being invisible. For 3 years, she had hidden in plain sight, running from the very man now offering her everything. And in this moment, she understood what her mother had meant with her dying words. The Ashen Line endures. Not through vengeance, not through blood, but through the strength to choose love even after loss, to accept a crown even after it had been torn away, to trust again even after betrayal. "Yes," Christiana whispered. Then louder, her voice ringing through the hall. "Yes." Abraham rose, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted his warrior's strength. The bond between them blazed like sunlight, complete and unbreakable, and Christiana felt something she had not felt since she was 7 years old. Safe. The throne room erupted in cheers. The weeks that followed brought transformation. Lord Severin was tried, found guilty by testimony and evidence that painted a decade of conspiracy, and executed at dawn. His allies scattered or surrendered. The northern territories, upon learning that Queen Elara's daughter lived, sent delegations to Blackridge bearing treaties and apologies. Elsinore's restoration began immediately. The burned castle would be rebuilt, the scattered people called home, and Christiana, no longer a maid, no longer hidden, would rule as queen with Abraham at her side, uniting two kingdoms through a bond that had been forged in survival and sealed in devotion. The High Council was reformed. Elder Marcus resigned in disgrace. Elder Lucien remained, chastened but loyal. New members were chosen, including, surprisingly, Marta from the Kitchens, whose practical wisdom and fierce protection of the vulnerable made her a voice the common people trusted. Justice, true justice, was restored to Blackridge. Maids were given names in the records. Accusations required evidence. Trials required defense. And those who had been invisible finally had voices that could not be ignored. On the night before Christiana's coronation, she stood on the balcony of Abraham's chambers, their chambers now, and watched the moon rise over the kingdom that had hidden her and the kingdom she would reclaim. Abraham joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Nervous, he murmured against her ear. Terrified, she admitted. I spent 10 years learning to survive. I never learned to rule. You've been ruling since the moment you refused to beg in chains. Abraham turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with heartbreaking tenderness. You ruled when you spoke truth to a corrupt court, when you stood with dignity while they mocked you, when you shifted to protect the man you loved. He smiled. You are already a queen, Christiana. Tomorrow we just make it official. She leaned into his touch, letting herself be held by the man who had hunted her scent for months without knowing why, who had recognized her when the rest of the world saw only a maid, who had shattered her chains and stood beside her against an entire kingdom. I spent 3 years running from you, she said softly. I know. I'm done running. Good. Abraham's kiss was gentle, reverent, filled with all the words they had not yet found time to say. Because I was never chasing to capture. I was chasing to find you. The moon climbed higher, bathing them in silver light. The same light that had witnessed her mother's murder, her desperate flight, her years of survival, and finally, impossibly, her salvation. Christiana rested her head against Abraham's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the warmth of the bond that connected them. She had been unseen for so long. But Abraham had always noticed, had always sensed her, had been searching for her, even before he understood what he was searching for. She was seen now, chosen. And finally, after 10 years of running and hiding and surviving, she was home. The coronation took place the following evening, under a sky full of stars. Christiana wore a crown forged from ash and silver, a symbol of a kingdom reborn. Abraham stood beside her, not behind, not above, but beside. 2 rulers, 2 mates, 2 kingdoms united. When the ceremony concluded and the crowds cheered, Abraham leaned close and whispered, "They said you would beg." Christiana smiled, remembering that day in chains, remembering the court that had mocked her. They were wrong. They were, Abraham agreed, taking her hand. The maid they dragged in chains walks out as a queen. And as they stood together before their people, Christiana thought of the girl who had scrubbed floors and hidden scars and survived impossible odds. That girl had never truly been invisible. She had simply been waiting, for recognition, for justice, for the mate whose wolf had been searching for hers, across 3 years of near misses and stolen moments. The Alpha King had never stood taller than when he stood beside his queen, and the queen who rose from ash would never bow again, except in love. The end. If this moonlit story stirred something in your heart, subscribe for more tales, and let me know in the comments. Your voice decides which destined love I tell next.